I've always been hyper fixated on trying to improve as a driver, for better or worse. It's been an obsession of mine from day one, basically. So what I've noticed, and it might be true for other people too, is that each of the cars that I've owned over the years have actually helped me to be a better driver in their own ways. But let's go ahead and talk about my first car, and maybe you'll start to see what I mean. Now, my first car was a 2001 325xi, so an E46 sedan with under 200 horsepower, a 5-speed automatic transmission, and all-wheel drive. Now, for some, especially by modern standards, that may seem like a pretty underwhelming package. But it was an awesome first car, although I do distinctly remember getting drugged down an on-ramp by a Ford Taurus V6. Regardless, in New England, where there are opportunities to drive in the snow, this was the perfect first car for someone that also wanted to learn the basics of car control. Its all-wheel drive system was rear biased enough that you could initiate power oversteer in the snow. I remember practicing slides and catching oversteer in my driveway and in parking lots for hours every time it snowed. This is definitely where I learned the foundation or the basics of limit handling and car control, and the inherent balance and lightweight of the E46 made it an excellent teacher. Now, moving on, my next car was a major jump in performance for me, probably irresponsibly so. At around 19 years old, I had a 2004 545i V8 with a 6-speed manual, rear-wheel drive, and actually a bunch of Dynon mods. I got really lucky on that car. Naturally, the first thing that this car taught me was respect. With twice the power, a manual transmission, and rear-wheel drive with an open diff, the 545 was a bit of a handful for someone so young. Now, very luckily for me and the car, because it didn't end up in a junkyard, an advantage of the E65 series, even one as old as mine, is that it has 2-stage traction control. For the first 6 months that I had the car, I wouldn't disable it completely. You press it once, go into that DTC mode, which allowed a little bit of slip before intervening, and you could get the car to step out mid-corner, correct it, and the car wouldn't intervene unless you got the angle too wild or if the slide kept going for too long. This gave me a relatively safe way to learn to correct and catch power oversteer in the rain or the dry, which required way faster inputs than the slow motion responses that I'd gotten used to in snow driving. Now, a complaint leveled against most non-M BMWs is their lack of a limited slip diff. Even in cars as powerful as my 545, which was like 360 horsepower, no LSD. This meant traction was very limited, and the car was actually very unpredictable when you got it spinning mid-corner. It would quickly go from spinning one tire to shooting you sideways seemingly at random when the E-diff decided to shift power around with the brakes. It's basically an old and very ineffective version of the brake-actuated E-diffs of today. But looking back, I actually think that that unpredictability helped me a lot. I had to learn to catch the snap oversteer that car would just kind of throw at you almost completely randomly. It was like having a batting machine set to a random interval, and you just never knew when to expect that shot to come. Now, thankfully, the Sport Pack E60 had some advantages to make this a bit easier. It had extremely quick steering for the time thanks to an active rack, and great body control thanks to, in 2004, active anti-roll bars. Kind of crazy, the E60 had some stuff that really was exceptional for a 2004. Now, this next car might be surprising to some to even be appearing in this video, but it's a great example of how cars that may be far from perfect dynamically can actually teach you a lot if you keep an open mind. Now, although I obviously had to learn the basics of driving manual on the 545, the car that actually solidified what I had learned was the Fiat 500 Abarth. I had already been rev matching downshifts for a while, but hadn't quite gotten used to heel toe yet. That's where the Abarth came in. This pedal spacing made it so easy for me by comparison to the BMWs that I'd driven. That, in combination with that little 4-cylinder's willingness to blip, without giving it a huge throttle input, meant that heel toe just clicked for me in this car. And once I had gotten used to it in the Abarth, that muscle memory actually made it way easier to do in other cars. So I have that little Fiat to thank for my ability to heel toe, basically. Now, next up, I purchased a car that brought everything that I had learned together. And also my first sports car, and one that I've had for 6 years, my Z4M.
Love the fact that you got your top down. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Powerful, manual transmission, rear-wheel drive with a limited slip diff, and a short wheelbase. These attributes meant that even with my prior experiences in those other cars, I was pretty cautious when approaching my M's limits at first. Now, thankfully, this is also the first car that I brought to Lime Rock Park's infield autocross track. With elevation changes and camber, similar to a tight back road, this was the perfect way to spend a lot of time at the car's limits without being worried about going off into the trees if I made a mistake. Now this revealed far more about the car's handling than I ever could have on the street. I found that I'd kind of misjudged it early on. It only snapped or surprised me when I made a mistake. It wasn't inherently difficult towards the limit, it just punished bad habits and mistakes. Being so small and with such quick steering, once in a slide, if you don't time your inputs perfectly on the way out of it, it's gonna snap on you. Something like an E39 M5 or even a Dodge Challenger are way more forgiving in terms of how much time you have to react and how accurate you need to be with your inputs. That long wheelbase kind of telegraphs things in advance, where the shorter wheelbase cars tend to be a little bit more snappy. But by the second time that I went out there, I was sliding the car through second gear, basically balancing it at full opposite lock. And if I hadn't gotten to know the car like that at the limit on track, I'm not sure I would have ever gotten to truly be comfortable with it or even appreciate it as much as I do now. I think one of the advantages of trying to improve as a driver is that you can actually make your own informed opinions on the way a car drives. I went into owning a Mustang thinking about all of the stereotypes and the crash compilations and Instagram commenters, but almost immediately I found out they're all dead wrong. Mine was a bone stock S197 with the Coyote, and it was easy as pie to slide around, handled way better than I could have even hoped, and with a couple of little tweaks probably would have kept up with or even beaten my M on a track. Now the moral of all of this rambling is this. For anyone who loves driving, I think it's important to always be looking for ways to improve. Once you think you're amazing or you have nothing left to learn, you will plateau or you'll even begin building bad habits. In a perfect world, we'd all simply be able to afford like a driving school or tons of track time. But for most of us, we have to learn in other ways. Whether it's sliding around the family Mitsubishi in the snow when you're a kid, or booking your first autocross session or track day, those that are obsessed with driving will always find ways to keep improving. So let me know in the comments how the cars that you've driven have made you a better driver, or an experience that stands out that maybe you learned from. So a little bit of housekeeping before I go. I've actually made the move to doing this full time. So videography, content creation, the channel is going to be my focus now, essentially. And so it never has been before. The videos that you've seen, the content that I've put up has been pretty inconsistent, and that's just because I was doing it while I was working a full-time job. So you're going to be seeing a lot more consistent stuff, going as far beyond what I've done before as humanly possible, as far as I can manage. And so I've actually created a Patreon for those of you that want to support what I do directly. I'd obviously really appreciate it if you want to do that, but otherwise just watching the videos, subscribing, maybe sharing it with your friends, that's more than I could ever even hope for. And I appreciate whatever you do. If you decide to do the Patreon, I'm going to be putting some behind the scenes stuff up there as I have time, try to do it every month, but really that is just a way for you to support the channel directly, if you'd like to. I'm really excited to kind of show you guys what I have in the works, and so stick around so you can see it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.